I don't know what life group you're involved in, but I'm involved in the life group that meets here on Wednesday nights, and Billy Gardner leads that group. He's our resident sheriff, not the sheriff, but the sheriff patrol. He has a better name for it that I'm probably messing up right now, but Billy is a super effective life group leader. And he's able to draw out not only what is being taught through the video or the book that we're studying, but he's able to draw out what's going on in our lives and how it applies to us and how it applies to him. And he has a story that is pretty amazing about where God had him, whereas it seemed like his life was falling apart and he was unsure where he was headed, and then what God did to bring him clarity and understanding of where he should be. So I asked him to share his story this morning and to hopefully encourage you in some way as you listen to it and apply it to your own life. Might need to turn it on. Check it out.
So I wrote this back in 2014. I'm not sure if Pastor realized, this is how I am. I write things down. This is the abbreviated version, though, so believe it or not. So on August 31st, 2012, 1 week before my 20-year anniversary with Motorola Freescale, I was fired. As the primary breadwinner for the family, the insurance provider, the man of the house, it was nearly devastating for me. So I wasn't sure what to do. I was even less certain how I would break the news to Lisa and the kids. On the long drive home, I called a colleague who has been in the workforce a long time and had experienced similar situations, and he assured me that everything would be okay, but I couldn't see how. Then I called Pastor Jeff. He assured me that God has a plan and he's in control. All I knew was I was not comfortable with God's plan. Both of these conversations, I couldn't control my emotions and the tears flowed. I found myself in the midst of a storm, and I was afraid. For about 5 years prior to this, I had hated going to work almost every day. I was constantly stressed out. I had migraines. I couldn't sleep well. I'd been getting bad reviews from my boss while getting praises from managers in other groups. And I kept trying to transfer out to those groups, but my boss kept blocking me. So I knew I was being set up to get laid off when things slowed down, because that was the way they did things. But I never expected to be fired while we were still busy. So I haven't mentioned I was fired August 31st. That also happens to be Braden's birthday. So I was fired on a day that was supposed to be a celebration, kind of killed my mood. So Facebook can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. So when I wrote this back in 2014, I looked back at some of the things that I had posted around this time. One of the thing that I posted that day was, yesterday I was telling some coworkers that next Friday I was going to bring in donuts to celebrate my 20-year anniversary with Motorola Freescale, and today I'm unemployed. Don't really want to talk, but I could use some prayers. So Lisa's mom texted her while she was at work and asked what had happened. So when she got home, she already knew that something happened to my job, and I was a little upset that somebody kind of butted in, but at the same time I was happy because I didn't know how I was going to break the news anyway. September 3rd, so 3 days later, I posted, my financial investments haven't always done really well, but I do have some investments that have made me rich beyond measure. Those investments are in relationships with friends and family, and it's my belief that life, especially the life of a Christian, is all about the relationships that you build. You are loved. Thanks for loving me and my family. I was confident that God was going to provide a job that I would love and that it would happen quickly. I have an electrical engineering degree. At that time, I had a project management certificate, so I felt like I was marketable. I thought things would be quick. I was given 2 weeks vacation and then received my final paycheck 2 weeks later. The day before I received that last check, I started working for a friend of mine from a previous church in his construction business. So I wasn't making anywhere near what I had been making, but at least it was an income. And prior to starting work with him, I had checked for unemployment, food stamps, all the help stuff that's supposed to be out there, and we didn't apply, or we couldn't get any of it. So working for my friend was a nice change of pace. There was minimal stress. The headache stopped, and I was sleeping well again. And it was during this time that I started to realize how much I was being poisoned by the environment that I was in previously. So while I was still at Freescale, we had the opportunity to buy NASCAR tickets for pretty cheap. So I wasn't sure whether we should attend because I'm unemployed basically, and I thought it was kind of odd. But we decided to go to the race because we needed family time together. And it was our money that was already spent. We were just going to be frugal with our money and take our own water, not eat at the track, all that kind of stuff. So we loaded up with freebies, a lot of freebies. The biggest surprise was Braden got picked out of the crowd when we were at the 3M tent. They brought him up on stage and did a bunch of stuff, and they actually gave him a $400 iPod. So I looked at that as God was able to provide him a better birthday present than I could have even when I was working. So my post about the family, my grandparents were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary in December of that year. We had previously committed to driving to Texas to celebrate with the family. So on one hand, I didn't want to waste the money to travel to Texas, but I also didn't want to disappoint my grandparents and miss their celebration. So we went to Texas, and I spent valuable time with my family. It was a very quick trip. I think it was 3 days, but it was very well worth it. So oddly enough, in January, when we received our annual giving statement from the church, it showed that we had tithed more in 2012 than ever before. Keep in mind, 4 months, I basically wasn't working. I believe that it was just a measure of how God was blessing our faithfulness over the years. For a couple years prior to me losing my job, we had tried unsuccessfully to get our house refinanced. Like many other folks at the time, we were underwater with our mortgage. Shortly after losing my job, some new programs opened up so that we were able to at least apply. With my Freescale income, we wouldn't have been eligible. If we missed a payment, we wouldn't be eligible. If I didn't have an income, we wouldn't be eligible. So we were only able to apply for the refinance because I had a job, but I was making so much less than I was before, and we hadn't missed a payment. The last 3 months or so of that process, the bank kept asking for more statements and more pay stubs. Nothing else was requested. No changes were made to the paperwork. Finally, in February, my friend's company, like sometimes happens in the construction business, ran out of work, so I was unemployed again. Now, if the bank asked for another pay stub, I wouldn't be able to provide one, and the last time they asked for a pay stub was the week after my last check. I already read that. A couple weeks later, our refinance went through, and our mortgage payment was reduced almost in half. Another benefit was to being unemployed was now I was eligible for unemployment. Stupid. Don't get me on the government, right? So Promise Keeper was being held at GCC in May. I wanted to go but couldn't afford to pay. And honestly, I was too proud to ask. I saw it as a want and not a need, so I just kept it to myself. A short time before the conference, Jim LaRue contacted me asking me if I would be willing to work security for the event. He had been in a meeting with the organizers and heard that they were short of people on the security team and thought of me. So I got to go to Promise Keepers for free. I worked behind the stage the whole time, and I even took a selfie with Lincoln Brewster. So throughout this time, we had to be creative in how we were spending our money, especially for special occasions. For instance, on Kimber's birthday, she decided she wanted to have a sleepover with a few girls. So instead of spending money on presents, we spent a little bit of money on things for the girls to do, and we just played games at the kitchen table. So as a result, some of the girls in here now call me Uncle Billy. Pretty proud of that. Back in 2010, I started volunteering with MCSO. I received some great training and developed some lasting friendships during that time. So while I was working at Freescale, I wasn't able to spend a whole lot of time going out, but at least I was consistent, and the sergeants and the deputies appreciated that. And then when I was unemployed, Lisa allowed me to go out more often as a stress relief. And it was a big stress relief. So I started getting to know more deputies, working on more squads, and making more of a reputation for myself. So throughout all this time, I would go through discouraging dry spells of getting no calls from literally hundreds of applications that I was submitting. I would get an interview or two and then get my hopes up, and then I would go for weeks without any calls again. Literally almost every single day, I received rejection emails from companies. It was very depressing. I had been sending my resume out, applying for jobs in Texas and Arizona. I wasn't sure what plans God had for me, but I wanted to be looking in the right place. So, of course, my family was praying that we were moving back to Texas, and all you guys were praying for us to stay here. So, guess we know who won. I didn't really care whether it was in Texas or Arizona. I just wanted an income. And then on October 1st, I began the qualification process with MCSO. There's a written test, a physical test, polygraph, medical exam, a written psych test, and an oral psych test. And then on December 6th, I found out that I was going to be offered the job and would sign my contract on December 12th. The academy started on January 6th. So by the time I started the academy, it had been 16 months. Remember, I was hoping for a quick thing? It had been 16 months since I lost my job at Freescale. Our savings had dropped to pretty much zero, but we were never hungry. We didn't lose our house. We never even missed a payment. My family was healthy, and our faith was stronger.
So how many of you would see going out and arresting people and breaking up fights and stuff as being a stress releaser? You know you're called into police work when that's your stress releaser. And this story, it really is amazing. There's a lot of things that Billy had to leave out for time, but just to see God work in piece after piece of that whole situation was amazing. And I'm sure as you were listening to his story, you were able to relate to some stories in your own life of when things were difficult for you and you were uncertain of the future and you were waiting for God to move and didn't know exactly how he was going to move. Those are difficult times. For Rhonda and I, when we were young and we were wanting to have children, that was one of those times when we just didn't see where God was moving. Every time that we'd get pregnant in that first trimester, some difficulty would come along and we'd miscarry. And we were just wondering, God, where are you in this? What do you have planned for us? Where are we headed? And I'll tell you a little bit more about that story in a few minutes. But I want you to turn to John chapter 11, because in this story, the trouble that Mary and Martha had was their brother Lazarus had just died. And they were having trouble aligning who they thought Jesus to be with what was going on in their life at that moment. So in John chapter 11, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.' Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days." Did you catch that? Let me read those last 2 verses again. Jesus loved Mary, or Martha, and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. What? You mean he stayed on purpose? You mean you're telling me that he stayed because he loved that family? Because when Jesus finally got to Bethany, Lazarus was dead. $1 late, or a day late, $1 short. It seems like to us anyway. Now, some versions say, yet when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, but whether it's yet or whether it's so, the same result was Jesus waited, Lazarus died, and Mary and Martha were in a lot of pain. But I think the word "so" speaks better to what Jesus' intent was. Jesus stayed because he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He stayed because he had a better plan in mind that nobody could realize at that point. And so he chose to wait, even though it would seem to Mary and Martha like Jesus just didn't come through for them. If you remember back a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the story of Jesus turning water into wine. And I told you that those miracles that Jesus did were not for the wow factor. That wasn't his intention, even though there was a lot of excitement around those miracles and around who Jesus was and who he was claiming to be. But that wasn't his purpose. Jesus wanted the people to understand who he was. He wanted them to understand that he was going to do what was best, not just what we wanted, not just what everybody thought was a good idea, but he was teaching them that he was going to do what was best in that situation. And Jesus' purpose always for his miracles was to glorify the Father and to help people believe in him. No matter what the miracle was, no matter what happened, it was always to glorify the Father and to help people believe in him. And so this idea of glorifying the Father, helping people believe, was the result of this story. If you jump ahead to the end, in verse 45, it says, "Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him." Jesus accomplished what he wanted to accomplish through this. He didn't do it just for their convenience. He didn't do it just for the praise and the platitudes. He did it so people would believe in him. Now, I want you to jump to verse 17 in the story. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." If only. Those words haunt us. If only. Think about the times you said that. If only this would have happened. If only that would have happened. And those if onlys just kind of mull around in our mind, and they tend to put us in this loop or in this cycle of questions and sorrow and frustration and sometimes even anger at God. If only God would have done this. If only this would have happened. If only I would have known that I was going to a country music concert last Wednesday. Where's Jeff? I got tricked last Wednesday to go to a country western concert. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I expected, that's for sure. But I'm really not talking about those things. I'm talking about serious things. If only we had caught the cancer sooner. If only I hadn't said what I said to that person. If only I hadn't been at my friend's house and saw those magazines. If only I could have held back his advances. If only I would have seen the signs earlier. Every single person in this room has their if-onlys. And they're very personal to you. And whatever they are, they're very painful to you. If only. And we struggle with those. And we deal with those. And we get stuck in those. So Martha says to Jesus, "If only you had been here, my brother would not have died." She was devastated. She was in pain. She wished things would have been different. She knew what Jesus was capable of. She knew he could have healed her or healed Lazarus. She knew things could have looked much different. If only she would have sent for Jesus sooner. If only Jesus would have understood the severity of the situation and he would have come sooner. And then when we start asking those questions, then we start asking questions of God. God, why? Why did you let this happen? Why did it have to be this way? Why couldn't you have come through for me? I thought you loved me. And the answer to those questions takes us right back to verse 5. Now, Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 days. Jesus stayed away from Lazarus out of love. Not in spite of love, but out of love. Because of his plan that only he knew was going to come about. A plan that was going to be much better than what Mary and Martha's plan was going to be. And so Martha is on this, this if only, Jesus, you would have been here. But then she says, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Now there's a faith statement, right? At least I think it was intended to be. Even now, God, Jesus, you can do whatever you want. And look at what Jesus says. Lazarus will rise again. Yeah, I know. He'll rise in the last day just like everybody else will. She couldn't believe what Jesus was trying to tell her. She knew what she was taught. She knew what she was supposed to say. She knew what her belief system was, but she couldn't wrap her mind around what Jesus really wanted to do in her life. And she was stuck with the if-onlys. She was stuck with the questions. But here's where Jesus steps into our lives. And he says, I want to take you from all of your if-onlys, and I want to take you to you only. God, you only. I trust in you. I trust in your plan. I trust in the direction that you're going to take me, even though I don't understand it. Moving from if only to you only. That's what God wants to do in our lives. Now, in our younger days, I was telling you that Rhonda and I were hoping to have kids. And so several times, same thing, every first trimester, there was complications, and we would lose the baby. And so when Rhonda became pregnant with our oldest son, Cameron, we were going along, first trimester, same thing, complications. She goes to the doctor doesn't give her very good news, so she comes over to the church that I was at, which was Phoenix First Church of the Nazarene. And we talked a little bit, and then we went and got our senior pastor. We went into the sanctuary, and we knelt at an altar, and we were praying. This was kind of like a do-or-die time for us. I don't know that we realized it at the time, but it was one of those big dividing points in our lives where we were either going to demand of God and then be mad at him if he didn't come through, or we were going to spend our lives saying, if only we could have had kids. If only, God, you would have come through for us. Or we could put a stake in the ground and we could say, but you only, God. We trust you. And we were, by God's grace, able to come to that point in that little prayer meeting that we were having, to just release it. It was a point of surrender for us to say, God, whatever you have planned, we're going to be okay with that. We're going to choose you. We're going to trust in you. We're not going to get mad at you if we don't carry this child. We're going to trust. Now, Rhonda didn't tell me at the time, but when we got up from that altar, she knew that she was healed. She didn't know if that meant that she was going to carry the baby or if that meant she was going to heal our emotions in a way that we were going to be okay with not having our own children. From that moment on, she never had one more problem with her pregnancy. God healed her right there on the spot. It was amazing. Thank you. And even more than the child, and Cameron, we love dearly. And I remember I think she delivered maybe on Thursday or Friday, and I brought him to church on Sunday because I wanted everybody to see. And I brought him up in front of the church, and I said, if you ever struggle to believe that God does miracles, you can always look at my son because he's a miracle of God. And we were so excited about that. But even more exciting was to understand that we were going to rest in God no matter what happened. And God honored that prayer. Now, sometimes that means you don't have kids, and I mourn for you if you've struggled in that. It doesn't always mean that we get what we want. It means that God's going to do what's best for us. And in the end, what's best for us is really what we want. We just don't realize it at the time. Moving from if only to God, you only. So he's helping us, calling us to turn away from the dreams of what could have been, what might have been, what should have been, and turning to just simply put our full weight on God and trust him and say, whatever you have planned, God, that's what we want. Now, as you read more of the story, you see that Martha was struggling with the same thing, that Mary was struggling with the same thing that Martha struggled with. As soon as Mary sees Jesus, she says the same thing that Martha did. But if you would have only been here, Jesus. And then she starts weeping. And then the story, it turns in a bit of a weird direction here, because it says that Jesus starts to weep along with her. Now, I don't think it's weird because Jesus was crying. I don't think it's weird that guys cry. I'm not saying that. It was weird because Jesus knew what the end result was going to be. He had already said, Lazarus is not going to die. This is not the way it's going to end. He already knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. In fact, later on, we didn't read the verses, but it says that Jesus said, Lazarus is just sleeping. I'm going to go wake him up. He knew that Lazarus was going to be risen. So I'm having a hard time believing that Jesus was weeping over his friend Lazarus when he knew what the end result was going to be. So maybe Jesus was weeping because he related to the pain and to the difficulty and the suffering and the evil that takes lives, the sickness, the brokenness of our world. And he saw that being played out in some people that were very dear to him. Last week, we went and saw the movie Only the Brave. It's about the Granite Mountain hotshots who died in the Yarnell fire. And I thought the movie was done really well. And man, it sucks you in, let me tell you. You experience the emotions in that movie. You know, when the firefighters are grabbing their protection and they're trying to get under there, and the fear that the actors portrayed in their eyes as they knew that fire was coming in a raging way. And then to see the emotions of the families when they heard that their husbands were gone, dads were gone. I mean, it was gut-wrenching. It was a difficult movie to watch in some ways. I didn't know any of those guys. I hadn't met any of their families. I didn't know very much about them, but I could relate to their pain and their suffering. And that's what Jesus does for us. He relates. He understands what we go through. He understands our pain. The Bible says that Jesus was tempted in every way that we are. It says that he was, in Isaiah, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He knew loss. He knew pain. He knew suffering. And he can relate to our pain and our suffering. And I believe that Jesus was weeping along with Mary and others that were with her that day because he cared, because he could relate, because he understood what was going on, and he understood the evil of this world that caused so much pain in people's lives. He understands your pain. Don't ever believe just because you haven't seen him move the way you expected him to or the way you wanted him to, that he doesn't understand you or that he doesn't care. He does. He understands you, and he's going to walk with you through the difficulties of your life. If nothing else, for whatever reason that Jesus wept at that moment, we know partly it was because he cares about us. Now, after a period of time, Jesus composes himself and the people and they're at the tomb, and he says, roll the stone away. And they're saying, whoa, don't do that, Jesus. He's been in that grave for 4 days. And in the King James Version, it says, he stinketh. I mean, that was going to be bad. This was not a good idea, Jesus. Don't roll that stone away. But Jesus doesn't listen to him, and he says, roll the stone away. And when everybody's running for cover and plugging their nose, Jesus begins to pray, oh God, please don't let Lazarus stink. No. Actually, he says, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe in you. Mission accomplished. What he set out to do was to glorify God and to help people believe in him. And when he raised Lazarus from the dead, he reached more people than he ever could have reached if he'd have just walked in on the scene 4 days earlier and touched Lazarus on the head and say, you're healed. He did it because he loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and because he loves us. And he wanted us to hear this story of his goodness, and he wanted us to believe in him. And that's what was accomplished there, and it's been accomplished throughout the ages. And then Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come out. And guess what? He comes out. He's risen from the dead, and he's wearing his grave clothes, and he's working his way out of the grave. And then Jesus states the obvious, hey, somebody get him out of those grave clothes, will you? Let him go. But I don't think he was just speaking the obvious, because I think those words applied to everybody standing there that day and everybody that's listened to that story from that day on. Get out of the grave clothes. Don't walk around in the if-onlys, and the I wish, and the questions, and the misery, and the cycle of why couldn't it have been different? And step into freedom. Rip off the grave clothes and say, you only, God. I trust you. And I can imagine Lazarus, he wants out of those clothes. It's just gross. And so he's fighting to get out of them as people are trying to take him off him. And I think that's the attitude he wants us to have. I'm not comfortable in these grave clothes anymore. I'm not comfortable living in that realm anymore. I want to live in freedom, to trust you and to follow you. I'm kind of making you guys the bad guys over here and you guys the good guys, but I don't want to live in the if-onlys anymore. I want to live in God only, you only from now on, because I trust you, because you know best. I don't know what's going on. All I know is what is right here. I don't know the future. I don't know what's happened really in the past that's made any difference. I only know right now. But God, you know beginning to end. You know what needs to happen. You know what's best for me. You know how to accomplish this. And whatever is good for you is good for me, God. And I trust you. I'm laying my life out for you to do with whatever you want. That's his call to us today. And if you're stuck in that cycle of the if-onlys, I just want to invite you today to make a decision to move away from that and to move into you only, God. In your worship folders are some cards. I'd appreciate it if you would take them out, and hopefully there's some pens close by that you can write with. And on the card, it just simply says, if only and God only, and you only. And in a minute, we're going to have a song that's sung. And while the song is going on, I want to invite you to write under the if only, whatever your greatest sorrow is, whatever your greatest struggle of, God, why did you let this happen? Why did it have to be this way? Just jot a few of those down, one or two, or whatever you need to write. It's totally up to you. And then under the you only, or if you've already used up that place and you need to go to the back of the card, that's fine. Maybe write a couple of statements of surrender or trust. God, I'm giving up on my way that I think things should have happened, and I'm going to trust that your way is better. Something along those lines that's a surrender statement that's putting your trust in him. And then when you've finished writing those things, I want to invite you still while the song is being sung to come up to the cross. We put it on the floor today so you could access it. There's some tape dispensers on the altar. And just take a piece of tape and stick that card on the cross as a symbol that this is a new day for me. This is a day when I'm moving away from that cycle of wonder, and I'm putting my full trust in you today, God. And so while the song is sung and you write and you do that, just let it be whatever God is speaking into your life. When you've put the card on the cross, you're welcome, if you want to pray at one of these altars, or you can return to your seat, and in a few minutes we'll dismiss the service together. But I'm going to pray, and then this is time with you and God, and whatever he wants you to do, whatever he wants to say to you. Let's pray. God, I just pray that in this moment there would be freedom. There wouldn't be fear of the future. There wouldn't be a determination to stay where we are, but there would be the freedom to move from where we are to where you want us to be. And I ask God that this would be a time that's meaningful to us as we take this action step, but not just for a moment, but really for the rest of our lives. That this would be a turning point to be able to say, God, no matter what has happened in the past, no matter what's going to happen in the future, I put my trust in you. May you be in control of these next moments. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.